misbehavior.
Mike's alive. All right, I'm going to call the special meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order on Tuesday, May 14th at 7 p.m. here in the Aldermanic Chamber. The prayer will be offered by City Clerk Patricia Piazzu, and Alderman Jetty will lead us in the pledge to the flag.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and serious duty to manage the affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with a spirit of unity and understanding, which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. So help us, God. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman Gidge. Alderman Harriet Gathright.
Present.
Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderman Clee.
Here.
Alderman Laws. Alderman Lopez. Alderman Karen.
Here.
Alderwoman Kelly. Alderman Jetty.
Here.
Alderwoman Malizi Gola. Alderman Tenza.
Present.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman Clemmons. Alderman Wilshire.
Here.
We have 10 members present.
I did hear from Alderman Laws. He had a family emergency, and Alderman Gidge will not be joining us this evening. Okay, so tonight we have a public hearing on Resolution 18073 amended, proposing an amendment to the city charter relative to filling vacancies on elected boards by a majority vote of the remaining members of that board. We're going to open it up for public comment, public testimony, I'm sorry. Testimony in favor first. Name and address for the record, please.
Kimberly McCarthy, 1921 Kimberly Drive in Merrimack. I'm here tonight to speak in support of R18073 on behalf of someone who couldn't be here, my dad, late Alderman Brian McCarthy. Since his name is still in the resolution, I thought it seemed fair that he had a voice in this conversation. I know my dad supported moving away from the special election format and returning to the appointment by the boards for the remainder of the term. City election turnouts have often been low are often low and even lower for special elections, and this comes at the cost for the taxpayers of Nashua and has been time consuming for the ward moderators and election officials. So this amendment does not give more power to City Hall, and it allows taxpayers to remain represented for as much time as possible. While the vacancy left by my dad's passing didn't result in any ties or close controversial votes, that may not always be the case. His seat was vacant for just over 4 months while the current special election process ran its course. The amendments to the charter would allow a vacant seat to be filled within a matter of weeks rather than having several months without representation. As I said, I know my dad supported this legislation early on, and I think he would be agreeable to the changes made since it was introduced. We had a discussion on the issue last year, and he said there was plenty of time to work on it. And I heard that same comment this past April when it was up in front of the Board of Aldermen, that the board had plenty of time. Yet the board seems to be here tight against the deadline for being able to get it on the November ballot. And I'm here tonight because you don't always get the time and opportunity you think you will. And none of us can guarantee that we'll be here tomorrow. So allowing the boards of Public Works, Fire Commissioners, Aldermen, and Education to fill their own vacancies will save both time and money for the taxpayers and allow for a more efficient process. So I ask that you vote to move R18073 forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else giving testimony in favor?
Good evening. Judy Blachek, 560 South Main Street. I'm here as Ward 7 clerk, and I just want to say I totally approve of this amendment. I believe saving the city a lot of money and everyone's time and effort is just the way to go, and I hope you'll support this measure.
Thank you. Testimony in favor.
My name is Stephen Elliott, 256 Pine Street. I'm in favor of this because it creates the incentive for people on these boards to make more vacancies, which means that a lot of evil things could possibly happen. And if you want this stuff passed, I hope it happens. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now take some testimony in opposition.
Good evening. My name is Paula Johnson. I'm afraid to touch this. Every time I do, it falls apart. Back in September 28, 2004, Resolution 04-126, and Alderman Wilshire, you were on the board at that point in time. The bill was sponsored by Alderman David Dean, by David Lozo. David Dean was a co-sponsor, myself and Robert Dion. And what we did was we felt that whenever there was, and Attorney Bolton, you were on the board back then too, and we felt that when there was a vacancy, we didn't appreciate the fact that somebody could just come in, give a resume, and it could be a cronyism, and somebody gets on the board. And it wasn't right. So when we wrote this, Alderman Lozo said, why don't we do it with the next highest vote getter? The person went out, they campaigned, they knocked on doors. If they didn't make it, let the next one in succession be able to obtain that seat. And I agree with that back then in 2004, and I agree with it now. Alderman LaRose came in, and he was the one who made this amendment that what would be that the next person, we'd have an election. But the intent of all of us was that we wanted to make it fair and even and make the playing field fair. If you go out and work and you might not make it the first round, and God forbid somebody has to leave for whatever reason, that the next person should have that opportunity. And you can go down the line. And if somebody doesn't want it as you go down the line, then you take the resume and then you talk about it. But that's what the intention was all along. And I hope that you would go back to 2004 and why we did this, because we knew that when somebody left, there was that hole to fill in any of these boards. And I hope that you reconsider our Resolution 04-126 back in 2004. It was sensible legislation the way it was written to begin with. It got all bound up and adding more and more stuff. And this is the easiest way, the fairest way for the next person to be the alderman, Board of Public Works, whatever it has to be. Thank you.
Anyone else want to give testimony in opposition to this?
Okay, my name is Fred T. Boom, 24 Cheyenne. First of all, it's customary, in fact, as an ordinance, before you have a public hearing, to have an explanation what the public hearing is about. And that didn't happen. Is mic on?
Yeah.
Okay. But being a public hearing, I have a question. That's also in the ordinance. So I'll address that question to whoever can answer, provide the answer. Let's take an example, because I tried to read this thing and it's pretty awkwardly written. If you have 3 years of a 4-year term remaining, and the vacancy is filled by appointment, that's the scenario, that's a question. Now, is then the election to appoint for 1 year until the next election, at which point there will be an election for the 2 years remaining? Or is it an appointment for the entire 3 years remaining,
No.
at which point there is an election? That's my question. What is the answer?
If there is a 3-year term and there's 1 year left, the person gets appointed and serves the rest of that term. If there's a vacancy a year in, and it's an at-large seat, and there are 3 years left in the term, that person will only serve until the next municipal election. They won't fill out the rest of the 3 years of the term, only until the next municipal election.
Okay. That's what I thought it said, but I just want to make sure. Now, let me make my comment in opposition. Now, I was part of the special election last time. And it was not an easy election. For one thing, the schools don't let out, so there's hardly any parking. Until the teachers leave in these schools around 3 o'clock, there's maybe 1 or 2 spots. And I've seen people circle around trying to vote, and they can't vote. In fact, on that point, I'll probably submit a complaint to the Secretary of State about obstruction of voting. Nevertheless, I do think special elections are expensive. and unnecessary. Special elections, as Paula pointed out, came about because of cronyism. Cronyism in school boards, where somebody would get elected, step down soon after their election because they really didn't intend to serve 2 years or 4 years, and then somebody else got appointed that the board liked. For a while, there was a practice in the city to appoint the person with the next highest vote. That was the person that lost the election, but it was the next highest vote getter. That was practiced in the school board until somebody showed up that was the next highest vote getter the school board didn't like, namely me. And then they got away from the practice. So that's why this charter change came about, to stop cronyism and hold an election. Nevertheless, what I recommend is some change to your legislation. What I recommend is to reinstitute this practice, but as a charter amendment. Namely, that if there is a vacancy, the first person that can fill that vacancy is the person that ran in the previous election and was the next highest vote getter. It's only fair. Now, if the next highest vote getter isn't available any longer, or doesn't want the position any longer, then you can have the board make the appointment, but only following an advertisement for the vacancy. So it just isn't an inside deal of making this appointment. Understand that? So the next highest vote getter is allowed to fill this appointment. That is my recommendation. Thank you.
Anyone else want to give testimony in opposition to this?
Good evening, Madam President, members of the Board of Aldermen. My name is Justin O'Donnell. I live at 355 Main Street. I am opposed to this legislation, not in spirit. I do understand the costs of special elections are a burden to the taxpayers and the management of this city, but rather as a purpose of representation. And I do disagree with the two previous speakers that the next highest vote getter should get the job, because in the previous election, the majority of the voters in the district disapproved of them to do the job in the first place. While I would ideally love to see the special elections happen if it weren't for the cost, there are some boards that I think should not be filled by an internal vote, namely this one, the Board of Aldermen. My recommended change that I would recommend, and I would fully support this legislation, is if the other boards were allowed to solicit applications and make a recommendation for the Board of Aldermen to fill those vacancies until the expiration of the current term, so long as this board, the board that holds the legislative and executive power in this city and where the rules derive from, is continued to be elected by the people you serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to give testimony in opposition?
My name is John Lyle, Bluestone Drive, Ward 8, moderator. As some of you may know, I sort of started this whole campaign against the special elections after the election of proposed with for the replacement of Bob Halloran, because of the cost and the effort put in for a low turnout election that was demeaning of both the citizens, who so many couldn't show up, the fact that we had the schools open, which was always a problem, and the fact that it was just a bad deal. So I proposed an alternative, and I've sent all of you my proposed alternative to this. But let me give you a very tangible example of why I think the proposal that you have is defective. The first, it goes back to the resignation shortly after the 2017 municipal elections of Bob Halloran from the Board of Education. When he resigned, the question it was unclear from the reading of the resolution which board would appoint his successor. the board that was in place at the time he resigned, or the one that had just been elected. The other thing is, we have an election every November in this city. Why do we have to wait for the end of the municipal term to have the election? Why not have it at the following November? I mean, we have the election, we have the mechanism in place, why wait? I mean, this is an important step, it's an expensive step, and I think that the legislation we have in front of us is just not appropriate. It goes back to the cronyism that some of the previous people talked about, on that the city rejected this approach some years ago and put in a new approach. But what we need is to meld the idea of appointments with an election, and using the Board of Aldermen as a way of assuring that there's minimal, if any, cronyism involved. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to testimony in favor at this point. Anyone else want to give testimony in favor?
Andrew Olding, 8 Rollercrest Drive. The idea of appointing does sound iffy to me, but I do like this because obviously the special elections do cost a lot of money. I would like to make a recommendation for an amendment to this, where particularly on this board, if you guys are, if the vacancy is an at-large, I think it's perfectly fine to fill it. If the vacancy is a ward, I think you should still have a special election, because at that point in time, only the at-large are the people who actually represent that ward at any given time. And so the ward should be able to choose its own representation. If it's an at-large, it's easier because you all represent, collectively all of Nashua, and that, I don't know, that's cleaner to me. And just doing a special election in a ward, I don't think at a ward is going to cost the $30,000 or whatever the last special election cost. I don't know exactly how much less it'll cost, but I figure like $5,000, $6,000, something like that.
No, about 30 or 35. Is there anyone else that wants to give testimony in favor of Resolution 18073? Anyone else want to give testimony in opposition to Resolution 18073? All right, one more time, testimony in favor. One more time, testimony in opposition. Seeing none, I'll call the public hearing closed. Alderman,
To adjourn?
no, you have a motion before you, Alderman O'Brien?
Yes, I have a motion for the city clerk to send a proposed charter amendment to the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue Administration for approval.
You've heard the motion. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that motion carries.
Now may I make the motion to adjourn?
You may.
Thank you.
The motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and we are adjourned at 7:19. Thank you.